If we're going to use the Axe-FX3 effectively, we need to understand how its architecture works. On any empty preset, you can hit the C encoder and go to the layout. I would recommend you then zoom out by pressing the A encoder, and you can see the entire layout, which is a grid of empty blocks. Now, the way I think about this is kind of like being able to walk into a room, select a bunch of pedals, amps, cabinets, microphones, rack effects, and cables, and then connect them in any way that I like. So the first thing you would want to do with your Axe-FX3 is to essentially connect an input to an output. I'm plugging my guitar into input 1, and my main signal is going out of output 1. So you might try something like this. Start up here in the grid and right-click if you're in Axe Edit, or you can just use the A encoder in the editor on the front panel. So go input 1, and then what we'll do is we're going to connect a long cable all the way over to here. You see this little guy here? Click that, and then connect it over here in Axe Edit. What you can do if you are using the front panel is just hold down the enter button, and it's just going to scroll across automatically. What we'll do over here is we'll put output 1 because that's my main output. What you'll now be able to hear is my main guitar sound. That's just the DI sound of my electric guitar. What we can then do is place blocks in any order that we like on this grid. For example, I might start with an amp block. Any old amp will do. So it's the Atomica High, I use that one all the time, and then a cabinet. And I can select from a lot of different cabinets. In this case, it's defaulted to this user cabinet that I've got. And then when I play guitar, it sounds a little more rock and roll. So that's like putting a amp, a cabinet, and a microphone in front of it and recording it. Note that if you're running direct, it's going to be a very different experience to hearing an amplifier in a room. It is an adjustment. Essentially, just remind yourself that you're listening to a finished recorded guitar sound, not a raw in-the-room guitar sound. What we can then do is to assign blocks anywhere we like. For example, a really common thing to do is to add like an overdrive pedal for a bit more of a boost before the amp. So I can go and select my drive block. And, I could go through and say, hey, you know what? I want a tube screamer. This T808, I want the drive turned down. I want the level all the way up. And then I've got, it's like turning on a tube screamer in front of an amp. Which I think is pretty awesome. If I was to do that just from the front panel, I can use the navigate buttons and move around on the grid until I find somewhere I want to put a block in, like this. I would then use the big rotary encoder, the value encoder, to select the type of block I want. In this case, I've selected a delay, and then I would hit enter. And as you can see, now I've got a delay in my grid. From the front panel, I could then hit the edit button to go in there. Alternatively, in Axe Edit, I can just click on it, and then I can go through and edit my delay block. Now, another thing to think about is your effect order and the way that is going to work. For example, a lot of people in the real world will use an amp, like say a really clean amp, and they would run a bunch of different drive pedals, delays, reverbs in front of the clean amp. One thing that's great about the Axe-FX is we've got the flexibility to put things where we otherwise might not be able to. For example, if you were recording your guitar amp in the studio and you record it in your DAW, you could then go and add like a delay plugin or send it to a delay bus or something like that. So in this case, if I wanted my main distorted guitar sound to be delayed, I could put the delay after the amp and the cab. Now, why would I put it after the cab in this case? In this case, the cab is running in mono, but if I wanted a stereo delay, like say for example, I choose this stereo BBD type, then this is going to give me a stereo repeats. Have a listen. But if I put the delay before the cab, in this case, the cab is on a mono setting, so it's only going to give me one side of that delay. And the same thing is going to apply for reverbs, drives. Putting an overdrive after the amp probably isn't going to sound as normal as you would expect if you put the drive before the amp. So just think of it, again, like a real rig. You've got cables that you can connect anywhere. For example, I could connect a reverb down here in a parallel block. I'll talk about parallel effects at a later date. Or I could send my amp to multiple outputs. For example, if I wanted to send output 1 to front of house with a cab sim on, I can also come down here and I could use output 2. I'm routing this signal of just the amplifier with no cabinet on it. I could route that to output 2 and connect output 2 to a power amp and a guitar cabinet and monitor myself. Or alternatively, I could just use output 2 at the end of the grid, and this is going to have the cab sim and the delay on it, and I might send that to a separate in-ears mix or a separate monitor that I just have control over, whereas the front of house guy gets output number 1. So this is really just scratching the surface of how flexible this is. You really need to keep in mind that, if you just put a block down here like, hey, I want a chorus, you can't just place it anywhere. It's got to be like in a real world rig. These are cables, and you're going to connect the different blocks up. The order is important, and then the way you route them to different outputs is important as well. Once you wrap your head around that, then it's really, really simple to go and make your own presets and hopefully make some of the best guitar sounds you've ever heard in your life.